Well, what is it about you that's lazy? Well, I'm not lazy. I think there are other people who can't work. It almost becomes that it's racist to ask for a voter ID card because black people can't get IDs.
Right.
Every black person I know has ID of some sort.
Yeah, and they think that's racist.
And they think it's ridiculous that you would make that claim. But that's the river already flowing kind of a narrative. The horse is out of the barn, the cat's out of the bag. We're chasing the cat instead of securing the bag. And I think even with socialism and communism, if we keep chasing the argument rather than getting upstream of the argument and going, hang on, so you like being lazy, is that what you're telling me? You don't want to work for your food? Oh, what if the next time I bring home a steak dinner, it moos? And in order for you to eat a steak dinner, you're going to have to beat the cow at its own living game and prepare that steak yourself. Then what? It begins to change the framework.
You're right. I mean, and that's how my father used to see if you were solid in your beliefs, is he'd ask leading questions every single time. And he was much better at it than I am. I'm a redhead. But
I'm a ginger.
Yeah, you're a ginger. So, you know, having those discussions and learning how to listen and how to ask the question is one thing. There's the far left that no matter how much common sense or how much you bring into the conversation, they will not see your point of view. You know, one of the things that I find is talking about philosophers or experts in their field. Thomas Sowell, one thing that he said is, it's not so much, once you fix the price, that does not answer the question of how much it costs. So how much it costs to make the product. So when you have a product that is, you know, corn, and if you have a fixed price, which is what Kamala Harris says she's going to do, she's going to fix prices. So she is going to set the price, which means that the farmer has to try to stay within that perimeter of what that price will bring and try to make a living even with that price set. But then if the inflation for him goes up, guess what? He can't make that crop anymore. So what that means is that then he's out of business. I can't.
So who's in the business of providing corn then?
Yeah.
The government.
Yeah, the government.
And that's really their end game.
That's
and I
their
think
end
that's
game.
the challenge, is that a lot of people, they can't see behind the sales pitch into the true meaning, and even behind that into the intent. I mean, what is the intent of electric vehicles? I think Elon Musk was really onto something. It's more powerful, it's faster, it's easier to produce, it costs less, it's got less moving parts, easier to maintain, et cetera, et cetera. And I think people caught onto that and went, hang on. So the Rockefellers made bazillions of dollars for generations off of everything pharmaceutical, off of everything petroleum-based, off of every plastic and synthetic, because they found out you could do it with oil. And that was generations of wealth controlled by one group of people. And now there's another group of people who are like, what's our equivalent? What's the new evolution of that?
Right.
And so the new evolution of that is cadmium and nickel and uranium and iridium and cobalt. Well, there are large deposits of every one of those in the U.S.
Right.
There are also large deposits of those in Africa and in Central America, where labor is cheap, and in China. And so it's a new generation of wealth, but they don't want to expose it that way.
Right.
They want to say, you know, global warming.
Right.
And when you ask them, well, how much CO2 is too much? I mean, how much is there now? And how much is too much? The people who have built their backs of their banking around the idea of CO2, they can't answer that question.
No.
And when you do, they're like, oh. So what you're saying is that 1 acre of cotton replaces the amount of oxygen in the air and sucks up more CO2 than 14 diesel trucks being taken off the road and replaced with battery. Oh. 1 acre of cotton? You know, 1 acre of cotton.
Yeah.
Been through West Texas lately?
Yeah.
Millions of acres.
Millions.
Well, until they set them on fire.
Right.
Right. So the offset doesn't even make any sense. But again, I feel like in some places we're simply arguing the wrong argument. You made a great point, though, with there are some who are so dead set on their ideologies that where they land on the political spectrum is always in the same spot.
Right.
Here's the irony, though. I see some people migrating. I think it was Bill Maher was the first one to say it, but a lot have said it since then. My ideas haven't changed, but the Democratic Party has left me. Mm-hmm. And so he said, I would never call myself a Republican. I don't even like the idea of being an independent. I am as liberal as they get. But these people are idiots. They have abandoned common sense for the purpose of an ideology. Yeah, those are called Hitler's youth. Those are the children of Stalin, the generation that he built for the purpose of reproducing that concept at their own expense, not his.
Right. And it's become a religion for them.
I think it always was.
Yeah, it always was. But now I think more and more people are saying these guys are a little too dedicated to all of this destruction, and it's become a religion to them where they're finding their self-purpose in all of this, and they believe themselves to be God. If you can change your gender, who is God? They believe they have now put that onus on a child to where a child can think that way. Why do I need God if I am God? If you think that you can change your gender, that's what it all evolves to. And so for me, being in this role, what I am targeting is the independents and the Republicans that have sat out the last elections. Or these.
So you're trying to move energy into conviction, into action.
Right. Because we have to. We have been given, it's as if we've been given a cancer diagnosis and we have only a few months to live. We have 76 days it is to live. We've got to fight like this is the end. And because if not, you are going to see America become London. You are going to see that our rights are going to be chipped away. It is in no small consequence that we were all put here at this time for a reason. God has He has Elon Musk where he's supposed to be, Trump where he's supposed to be, all of these players, this show being here, me saying, I've never ran for office or any type of leadership role to where I'm now at this level that it's because God has me here for a reason. And the reason is I believe I have a message to bring people to the polls, to get people in action for the first time in their lives. They have no other choice at this time because God has them here for a reason at this time. They don't have the choice of sitting back and just watching it all happen. They have to get out and vote.
One of my philosophies with Lead the Narrative is that it has not always been this way.
Yeah.
But it will not always be this way.
Yes.
And we've got to realize, like Reagan said, it's very fragile.
Yes.
It hasn't always been that a man could walk into a women's locker room fully nude and do his thing, and everyone else would lose their gym membership, lose their job, potentially lose their freedom, be canceled on their social media. It hasn't always been that way. In fact, we don't have to go back too far that people will go, you are crazy, that'll never happen.
Right.
Okay, but in that same storyline, it won't always be this way. So wherever you feel your level of comfort, your level of safety, your level of, well, I've moved out of the big city and into a small town, it's not coming here. Jason Aldean even said it. Try that in a small town. You're going to get a different reaction. But they did try that in this little small town.
Yeah, they did.
And they tried to get a city clerk fired, and they tried to divide a church, and they won. And they tried to get the books in the library, and they won. And in a small town, there's a whole lot of apathy. And that apathetic response is, it's always been like this, but it won't always be like that.
Right.
And so we've got to stand up and defend. I think the other part of that, very subtle, almost like the ghost flames on the side of a car kind of a narrative is, people love to gaslight the idea that America's not really going to go away. Well, it won't go away.
Right.
It's not like the geography is going to be overrun and we'll wake up tomorrow and there'll be Chinese flags everywhere. Not just yet. And in fact, they'd be better off to adopt us, like a mergers and acquisition, to say, I want you to keep your means of production. I want you to keep doing what you're doing, but we're going to have this government corporate merger relationship. Vivek Ramaswamy wrote about it in the book Woke Inc. Very elaborately. Will America truly go away? Sounds very much like the question the serpent asked Eve. Did God truly say? And the gaslighting begins right in that question. To say, well, America's not really going to go away. You must be crazy if you really believe America's going to go away, like we're going to wake up and red dawn, Chinese and Russians everywhere, right? Well, not exactly like that. And because it's not exactly like that, the other side argues and like, well, you've got to be a conspiracy theorist if you believe that that's what's going to happen. Well, I don't believe that's what's going to happen. Here's what I believe is going to happen. My grandpa's America isn't coming back.
Right.
Those values, those ideas, you know, the old song by Alabama that says, I'm sitting here in the Tennessee sun under the windmill and I'm watching everything going on around me. And I want to go back to those days. I had this conversation with a young man and he said, I can't believe they want to outlaw an article of clothing. And I said, you missed me. What are you talking about? And he said, they want to outlaw an article of clothing again. I said, what article of clothing are you talking about? A hijab? Or he said, no, a hoodie. I said, what do you mean they want to outlaw a hoodie? He said, you know, every young African-American in the world wears his hoodie, hood up, headphones on. He's just doing his thing. Leave him alone. I said, you know, my boys at the time were 17 and 18 years old. I said, if that boy comes in the house with his hood up so I can't see his eyes, his sunglasses on, his ball cap pulled down, and his earphones in, I can't even tell him if the house is on fire.
Right.
I don't know if I have his attention or not. That's a really bad plan. That's unsafe and unwise. But add that to coming into a public place where you could easily snatch a $50 bottle of liquor and stuff it in the front pocket of your sweater and walk out the door. And yeah, now you look like you're up to something. And I don't care if you're purple.
Right.
You look like you're up to something. I think everybody, more than they want to outlaw the hoodie, they want to go back to a simpler day. Like, I grew up in Lampasas, Texas, great old metropolitan area of 5,000. Most of those were cows. And yet we would leave the front door not just unlocked, half the time it was open and the screen door was all that was there. My uncle would leave the windows down to his car and the keys in the ignition.
Right.
And never worried about somebody taking it.
No.
We want to go back to that day. Like Mayberry, where you can walk down to Aunt Bee's house and grab a slice of apple pie and sit on the front porch with her and just have a conversation and everybody knows everybody. We want to get back to that day. And he looked me in the eye and he asked a very powerful question. It changed the way I tell stories from the stage. He said, where was I in your picture? Where was I in Mayberry? And I said, you know, as I think about it, he said, you don't have to think much about it. There were only 2 black people in the entire lifespan of that show. And I said, really? He said, yeah, one was a crook that came to town. The other one's a gas station attendant. They weren't real people. They didn't have real ideas. This fictitious land never really existed. I said, oh, it existed. I grew up in it.
Right.
But you're right. Even in my tiny little hometown, the number of people with dark skin, if they weren't Latino, you could count them on fingers and toes. And that's not what I'm looking for either.
Right.
I'm not saying let's go back to a land where white people ruled everything and nobody else had a say. That's not what I'm talking about. Like I said, I've been to the Congo. I've been to Cuba. I've been to Brazil. I've stood face to face with some of the most powerful leaders that don't even speak English.
Right.
And their ideas are life-changing and revolutionary in the way that we get along as human beings. And we don't have the right, the power, the authority, nor is it wise to suppress those ideas. But there are ideas that are proven just dangerous.
Yeah.
They're seductive in the way that they're delivered, but there's nothing good to come of them. I would put communism and Marxism in that category, but I think there are some others that we have to look at and go, yeah, that just never worked out well. But whoever thought we would land a rocket from space right back in the same place it took off from?
Right.
That's some out-of-the-box thinking. Who would have ever thought we could magnetically levitate a train at 100 miles an hour? That took some out-of-the-box thinking. We need that. And that doesn't always come from the same group of people. And when I look at this political spectrum and the political rhetoric, politics itself, dividing left from right, tends to polarize people to such a degree that the commonality of our human good gets lost. ideas that should be universally agreed on that we can look at and go, that actually is a good idea. We refuse to agree on.
Right.
Because that person, they're gingers, or they support the orange man, or, whatever reason. I had a guy stop me in a parking lot one time. He's like, I bet you're a Trumpian. I said, a what? He said, I bet you love Donald Trump. And I'm like, what makes you think that? He goes, well, look at you. What do you mean by that? Is it because of the color of my skin or the color of my hair? He's like, well, all that, and you got an American flag on the handlebars of your motorcycle, and you're riding a motorcycle in your dress clothes, so obviously you're rich. And I'm like, I don't even know where you get all this stuff.
Right.
Then he says, I bet you worship a white Jesus.
Oh, my goodness.
And I said, no, actually, based on the historical text, he would have been kind of olive-skinned, probably closer to you than me, with a funny-looking nose and a different bridge style on his nose, because that's normal for the genetics in that part of the world. Mm-hmm. And he said, really? We ended up talking from a fist fight about to start, which is what he wanted.
Right.
We ended up talking 2.5 hours.
That's beautiful.
When we were done, he said, if you ever start a church, I'm coming. You let me know where it's at.
Wow.
I'm like, when was the last time you went to church? He said, I've never been to church, but I would come to yours.
Wow.
And I thought, that's the kind of conversations that we're not having.
Right.
Those are the kind of conversations we need to have. And
Right.
like your dad,
Yeah.
we've got to ask the deeper question of our kids, of our neighbors, of the people sitting next to us while we're having coffee, and the fact that we're terrified. Had a similar conversation the other day standing on the side of the road with a guy that was on his way to preach at a little cowboy church. He says, my friend stopped for gas right over here in Hood County. He's playing his music in his truck. The guy on the other side of the pump said, hey, who's that? And they started talking. They ended up talking about their faith and their Bible. And a lady pulled up in a little car behind them, overheard them talking about the Bible, called 911 and said, I'm offended. And the Hood County Sheriff arrested the man and took him to jail.
In Hood County?
In Hood County. That's the story I was told. Haven't been able to verify it yet, but that's the story I was told.
Yeah.
That's frightening.
That is frightening.
But we know it's happening in London. So
Yeah.
here's the real question. Why is it so polarizing when you're on one end of that spectrum or the other, that it's not just I have my ideas and I hold feverishly to them, but I can't tolerate you having any idea other than that?
Right.
Because I'm not even sure that's human nature. That seems to me to be demonic in nature.
It is. I think it is, because God did make us to be social beings. And
Wired for love, as Dr. Leaf says.
Yeah. And you're not wired for love if you are combative and you find a way to be combative on every single issue. I have a ton of Democrat friends, and I don't talk politics with them unless they want to bring it up. I have a niece that she did something beautiful one time, and she said, Aunt Dee, I want to ask you, because I love you and I respect you, but I don't know any Republicans. I know you are. I want to know why you think the way you do. And I said, okay, we're going to have this discussion. And I said, but you cannot call me names. You cannot belittle me. You cannot degrade me. You have to hear me out. And I'm going to ask you questions. And she was like, okay. Well, we sat in the park. I sat in my parking lot for 2 hours while she asked me questions over and over again about different things. And I was able to be heard for the first time. And for her first time, she listened to what it was that the reason why I believe the way I do. And I try to listen to my friends on why they believe the way they do, but they just cut me off and won't have a dialogue about it. And that is disheartening. So we have a superficial relationship, really, because if you can't tell me why you believe the way you do about certain topics, and you're not going to listen to mine, we don't have an in-depth relationship.
Right.
We have a superficial relationship. Now, I have one friend of mine that he challenges me completely on abortion. And I tell him, I will never, ever believe that it's okay to kill a child. I can't go there with you. You believe this way, and you are adamant that it is this, that it's a pro-choice, pro-woman argument. I disagree, because a piece of her dies and she may not realize it, like the 25 that are at the DNC. They may not realize it until they get much older, or if they develop breast cancer because of the hormones that they stopped in their body without naturally letting them get out of her system. When all of those things happen, she's going to have to reflect on what she did, and she got caught up in the popularity and the media spin and how cool it is to do this, and she didn't realize this was a human that I ended their life. The one thing that I love that Ron Paul wrote when he was a doctor, he was interning at this point, or residence, and he was at an ER, and he said, I sat there and I was in one area where they were like, the girl wanted to have an abortion, and so she decided she was going to have an abortion. He said, then the next 30 minutes later, the same age pregnancy was going on, and they were doing everything possible to save the baby. And he said, we were saying, this one's valuable, this one's not. And he said, that's when it changed everything completely in me, because I was seeing that we were making a decision on who was a valuable life.
Right.
And he said, and that's when I became pro-life. Couldn't do that ever again.
Well, and you listen to people like Ben Carson, when somebody said to him, it's just a blob of tissue. He's like, well, that's funny, because I've separated the brains of Siamese twins while still in the mother's womb. That blob of tissue is now two separate humans. And people can't get that. It's like the girl who stood up and said, do you identify as a black man? And Alan West looked at her like, as opposed to... He said, yes, I've always been a black man. I was born a black man. I will die a black man. I don't think I'll ever be anything else. And in that answer, she said, shut up. I just asked you a question, yes or no.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, where does the vitriolic response come from? Why so much hatred in that? Why does the conversation have to go that way? I love to have conversations when we can literally, genuinely remove the labels.
Right.
One of the first pieces of literature I wrote, gave to my education counselor when I was coming out of the Air Force. And she's like, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I want to be the next James Dobson. I want to travel around the world and write books and speak in front of crowds and save families. And she said, well, have you ever written anything? And so I pulled from this giant stack of stuff, a random page. Honestly, I had no idea what I was giving her. I just gave it to her. She read it, got up and walked out of the room. And I'm like, it was either really that good or really that bad. I don't know. She's gone probably 10 minutes. And she comes back. She said, okay, so what do you want to go to school for with your GI Bill now that you're getting out? You want to go on to the fire department? You want to keep doing that? I said, no, I've got too many injuries now. Being a firefighter is really hard on my body. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking journalism, or maybe going to school to be a better writer, something like that. She goes, journalism's not going to take you. Interesting comment. I said, okay, well, what about like English or something like that? She goes, you have that mastered. I'm like, I'm 23. What do you mean I have that mastered? She said, I've never read anything more articulate than what you get expressed here. She said, my real challenge is, where do you get your ideas? Is it this James Dobson guy? And I'm like, what do you mean? She said, well, what you wrote here. And then she handed it back to me, and I realized what she read. And I was like, oh. She said, is this James Dobson thinking? And I said, no, he probably wouldn't even agree with that. He wouldn't get past the title, to be honest with you. But no, I don't get my ideas from James Dobson. I think about them, I pray about them, I meditate on them, I do some research. That's what I write. The topic of the piece was, I am pro-choice and pro-life. Because my belief is, in the same way that I can choose to do 80 miles an hour in my car when the speed limit is 55 or 25, I'm taking a lot of risks. There's a whole lot of consequences. I love to ride my motorcycle fast. I always try to find safe places with nobody else around to do that. But I love the feeling of 110 miles an hour. There is no place in the United States where that's legal. I can do 85 on the highway on the way to El Paso. That's about, right? So unless I'm on a drag strip, I shouldn't be doing that. It's against the law. It's dangerous. And if I crash, I'm probably going to die.
Right.
But it's still fun.
Right.
It's a choice with massive consequences, but it's still my choice. Mm-hmm. I put abortion in the same category. The challenge for me is, insert a little parenthetical here. I have a coaching client now who last week spoke in front of the United Nations. In January, she spoke in front of the Supreme Court on the topic of abortion. In high school, she was voted Nanny of the Year. In college, to fit in, she terminated 3 pregnancies. She's not a mother now. She can't have children now. But she will tell you all of the trauma and the drama from that season of her life has had lasting effects, from drugs to alcohol to binge eating to the list goes on and on and on. And she said, you know, women were sold a bill of goods that terminating a pregnancy was the same as getting rid of bronchitis. And that lie has caused people to choose to make a decision based on false evidence. See, if I really believe that driving 60 miles an hour versus 110 is no different at all, that the risk is the same, I can handle it, I can control it, and I'm no different than any other addict or anybody else who's been lied to about the consequences of behavior. And I think that's the challenge, is that we've again, we're on the wrong end of the river chasing the wave and going, we're not going to stop this because so many people believe it's a choice that prevents consequences. Not that it's a choice with consequences.
Right.
And when that lady read that piece at 23 years old, never married, never had kids, and I said, I'm pro-choice. It's a woman's choice. It's not my place to say. It is my place, on the other hand, to inform her that that choice is murder in the eyes of an almighty God, and the consequences are coming. Even if you don't see them now, they're imminent. And she said, the problem is you couldn't know that at your age. That's some kind of wisdom that you're going to have to wait till your hair falls out or turns gray before anybody believes that you know what you're talking about. Well, I got the gray hair now, so maybe they'll believe what I'm talking about. But I think that we still go back to the same thing, right? It's all about the conversation. How do we convert energy to conviction to action? How do we get people not to just scream and yell, well, you can't believe that because you're Republican. What I believe in being Republican are not necessarily the same thing. I don't believe everything I believe because I'm a Republican, nor would I believe everything I believe because I'm a Democrat or an independent, because I'm a free thinker. I think I study, as you can see. I've got a couple of books in my library, and this is about a third of them. I don't want anybody's one opinion to shape my life unless it's God's.
Right.
But I think that's the challenge that we're running into, is that so many young people have been indoctrinated. As Bruce Lipton says, whatever they believe between 1 and 6 years old, they will probably believe the rest of their life. It's in the subconscious brain. And so we've got to do a lot of work to undo what they've heard. Was it Jefferson that said the philosophy of the schoolroom in this generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next? And that's what we're seeing. And it's why from, you know who Kinsey is, right? The father of sex education. Do you know who his #1 marketing guy was? Larry Flint.
Oh my gosh.
He was asked to go onto college campuses because when they started promoting this sex education stuff in the late 60s and early 70s, they said nobody, they were all prudes. They wouldn't listen to the idea that you could sexually stimulate a 2-month-old boy. That couldn't be right. Like, that couldn't be right. Nothing. You should have been in jail. It's called sexual assault of a child.
It is.
But instead it became the indoctrinated policy for people who are now our college professors. And Larry Flint was the guy who went out there and made all that acceptable fodder in the sexual revolution and changed the way we look at sexual behavior, thoughts, patterns. And so now it's commonplace to have that conversation. But it, again, has become very polarized because it's so deeply ingrained in the subconscious mind. It's my choice, it's not yours. It's my body, that's my choice. I can behave however I want to, unless it's a vaccine. Then it's not your choice, it's the government's choice, right? So, well, I appreciate that you're doing what you're doing.
Well,
and I appreciate you stopping in and giving us some of your time for this conversation. And I'd love to have another conversation with you another time if you're back in town.
Oh, yeah.
And so tell people how they can be in touch with you, how they can take some action on the things that you're doing right now, and if they're local, how can they come and be a part of what's going on here in Granbury tonight?
Well, tonight I am at the
Wisely
Center, and I'm very excited about that. A bunch of great people are out there from 6 to 8 p.m. And then also my email address is vicechair@texasgop.org. If you want to get involved, I can get you in touch with your GOP office that is there locally, or if you happen to know who your local GOP is, then call them, let them know that you want to help at the polls, or you want to help with our voter registration drives that we have going on. We have got to make this election too big to rig, and we have got to get out the vote, and everybody has got to get involved. We don't have a choice this time. We have to get involved. We have to claim our state. We have to defend Texas, and then we'll save America. That's how simple it is.
And we can find the America that was once great.
Yes. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
And we can change that philosophy. I remember the first time I saw a guy with the hat on, and I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Make America great again." And the guy standing next to me goes, "How you can make it great again if it was never great in the first place?" I said, "What do you mean it was never great?" And he started quoting the table of contents of the 1619 Project. That's what they mean by lead the narrative. Robin DiAngelo, I don't have her book up there yet, but I have Abram Kendi's.
Well, and she's lovely. But the other thing with that is that, the amount of things that the Democrats have done and the liberals have done, the amount of money, we will never be able to get the money that they have been able to get. We will never be able to spend it the way they've done. We don't function that way. And unfortunately, it is a drawback that we'll never have the Soros money. We'll never have Hollywood in our corner. But if you look at how much we've been able to do, despite not having the money, the media, or Hollywood, it is only by God's grace that we've been able to accomplish what we have been able to. That we have been able to, we have 17 new conservatives coming into the Texas House. They were outspent, each one of them were outspent at the least 5-1. And they've all been able to win. We still have another few seats that we're going to probably turn over some Democrat seats. There is a lot of energy and impact that we are having. We just have to stay engaged, and we have to get more people in.
Well, it's what they meant by grassroots and Tea Party.
Exactly.
And I think you're right, and I haven't really put my finger on this yet, but you make a great point. Part of the power of the extreme left, Democrats loosely included in that, is that they are lockstep.
Yeah.
And so whatever the mantra is that comes down from the top, everybody believes it. They claim that the right uses dog whistles. I teach storytelling and public speaking for a living. That's what I do for my full-time job. I teach people what it means to lead the narrative through what Tony Robbins would call NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which is to actually intentionally seed concepts into a sentence that other people would go, "Yeah, it feels like that." And so you're poking them in their emotions so that they respond with their own natural reaction. On the everything right of center, individuality, rugged individualism is the driving force, which means it's impossible to get them to collectively think. 50 million Texas Americans will still think like 50 million different people.
Yes.
You're not going to get 2 million Dallasites to think exactly the same just because they're all Republican. On the other hand, once you're on the left side, you're in that indoctrinated camp.
Yes.
You do what you're told, you think like you're told, you follow along.
Yep.
And what we see with people like Bill Maher or even George Carlin, and he was coming near the end of his career, is that they began to realize, I don't think like that. I mean, I did, but I don't anymore because I realized. And the further they move away from the left, the more individualized they become. And that's part of the challenge. It's real easy for a George Soros, who's really a globalist, depopulationist, wants one group of people to be in charge and everybody else to be puppets. He will do that through food. He'll do that through pharmacy. He'll do that through owning land. He'll do that through breaking economies. He has bragged about bringing the Greek economy to the ground. In some places, he said straight up, I feel like I'm God myself.
Yes, he
because
did.
of the amount of influence and impact that I have. And you can only do that when you can build a collective hive mind and everybody responds exactly the way they're supposed to. So even those that rise to the top in leadership, they've got to realize they have a God and it's not Jesus Christ. They can label him anything they want to, but they're still going to do what they're told to. On the other side, we have 10 million little ants who don't follow instructions. They have their own ideas, as Mr. Obama said in his presidential campaign in Pennsylvania, they said, do you think you'll take Pennsylvania? He said, I don't know. I'm really concerned about all those people out there in the woods clinging to their gods and their guns and religion. And that's part of the challenge we have as Republicans, is activating people who share the same worldviews, the same concerns. You know, I want my kids to be protected educationally. I want my kids to be independent. I want my kids to be strong and resourceful. I want my kids to be self-sustaining. Not just my kids, but the next 10 generations.
Right.
Those worldviews, those common, I'd love for them to be in church, but at minimum, don't bring harm to others. Good grief.
Right.
And yet those individual ideas look like 10,000 fractured pieces of stained glass, as opposed to one lens through which to look. And that's the difference in my observations between the right and the left. The right and the left is just that it's either a collective mind or it's a million individual minds, and it's hard to get them all moving in one direction. At the same time, I'm not sure that's what we want either.
Yeah.
I love the way Glenn Beck says, look, we're not going to agree on everything, but if we can just pick the 10 Bill of Rights. If we can start there. America's a good place, not perfect, but better than any other place on earth. And the Bill of Rights was pretty good stuff.
Right.
If we can stick with that.
Yep.
You speak your mind, I'll speak my mind. You protect yourself, I'll protect myself. And if necessary, I'll protect you as well.
Yep.
If we could just go down that list and go, okay, we can agree on that. We can argue about the rest of it till the cows come home. And then we'll make a steak.
Yeah. Yep.
Dorinda, I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. Thank
you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Hope to see you again. I will
Yes.
definitely be there tonight to
Okay, great.
maybe catch some B-roll clips and things of that nature,
Good.
but I think it'll be a great conversation. I look
Yeah.
forward to hearing what everybody else has to say about it.
Yeah, me too.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Listen, if you've been watching Lead the Narrative and you're live on Rumble or you're live on any of the social media platforms, the whole thing will stay up in its entirety without any cuts. If you haven't been watching it live, that means you're watching the playback on OBBM TV, and it'll probably be a couple of segments because this has been a little long. We may make 3 shows out of this, but all of the information is valuable. All the concepts are valuable. All of the ideas are valuable, and so are you. And your greatest value in defending America, making it the home that you want it to be, is to let your voice be heard. I don't care if you agree with me or not. You have a right and an obligation to speak. I don't care if you agree with me or not. You have an obligation to vote. I don't care if you agree with me or not. Your voice must be heard because silence is consent. I'm J Loren Norris. We'll Lead the Narrative, and I hope to see you again soon.